Most
The
people
usual.
see it in the recording that'll get posted. It's always
Yes.
Father Bulk. Okay, we're good to go. Hi, everybody, and welcome, Taryn, and welcome everyone
Thank
who's
you.
joined us. This is our second edition of Rental Thursdays with Taryn Retief.
Good evening, everyone.
Brought to you by Real Estate Insider. Just a comment before we start, if you are watching this, as most people will be later after the live recording, on the YouTube channel, realestatetv.co.za, below there will be a subscribe button and a little bell. If you could click the subscribe button, then you won't miss any edition of Rental Thursday, and you'll be notified about it. And click the little bell as well. So we're on time and ready to go. How are you, Taryn?
Very well, and you? Just a very cold evening in Cape Town, so we've got lovely rain, which is good news, I suppose.
Well, I'm very pleased to tell you it's a very sunny evening here in Ireland.
Not fair.
Right, so this discussion today is about rental scams, and I couldn't help wondering that we might have encouraged a few people to connect and to watch the video later to pick up some tips on how to run a rental scam, which is not the idea.
Definitely not.
No, so this is actually to try and stop scammers from having any success. So with that in mind, I thought to start off with, I'd ask you a couple of questions, Taryn, and the first one is, why are rentals and renters such targets for these sort of scams? I mean, why do you find, and what's the reason in your opinion?
Well, it's a very sad fact, but when it comes to scammers, it's an easy playground for them to pick up clients that a lot of them are in the system. A lot of them are looking for residential homes to live in. It's not a want, it's a basic need. A lot of these tenants are very desperate, usually in between rentals, and the bottom line is they need a home. So with that background, it's become quite an easy picking for scammers that can get away with quite a lot with vulnerable people that are trusting the process online. And
I'm obviously aware from South Africa of the degree of rental scams that are going on, but I've become quite aware of the fact that it's quite commonplace here as well in Ireland, and
yes.
It does seem to prey on people who are quite desperate. I was just wondering, maybe you could start off by discussing some types of rental scams and some of your experiences.
Well, I can give you an example of a sort of quite a common rental scam, is whereby we had an incident that we had a real estate agent had loaded their property online as a rental and as a sale, and the scammer came in and copied the pictures and reloaded the rental in various different other sites, such as Gumtree. I'm not going to name any, but there's various kinds out there at a lower rental. At the time, that particular house happened to was going through renovation. So with a lot of contractors backwards and forth. So the scammers know what they're doing. They know more or less where the house is, so they can actually see the background. I mean, it's a business. And anyway, someone responded on the ad because it was like the price was brilliant, and they said you can go along and have a look at the property, which they did. The painters allowed them in. The young woman had a look at the property, and she immediately contacted the so-called landlord and asked if she could apply. And at that point, he said no problem and asked her for a 10,000 Rand deposit to be paid along with the application, which she did, because they are professionals. And luckily, or not luckily, but there was a brochure that was left by the agents. Often there's brochures or magnets on the fridge. And this tenant contacted the agent, the real agent, and asked if she could move in earlier. And at that point, they found out that it was actually a scam. And it's a horrible lesson, but it happens over and over again. That's just one of many kinds of scams that are happening out there.
Okay, so the basically where the person pretends they own the property, and they
Yes.
and I think a common, having read up a little bit about this, obviously as well, very often the rental that's offered is such a bargain. It's a little bit too good to be
Too
true.
good to be true.
Yeah.
And that's one of the warning which we'll get to just now. But so yes, it's an easy playground for scammers, and it's viable for them.
I thought, if you don't mind, I'll just share one that happened with me. It was a couple of years ago. There was a young immigrant couple came into our Takai office and wanted to talk to us about what was going on with their rental. And what had happened is they'd also responded to a private rental ad on Gumtree. And I think it's these classified sites like Gumtree do seem to be a favorite haunt, because people can, without any ID, can actually place ads quite easily.
That's right.
And they had been told that the property was going to be on show on the over the weekend, on the Sunday. And they should go along and have a look at the property, because the landlord was in Johannesburg. And not to mention to the agent that they were looking at it from a rental point of view, because they were going to do a private rental, and that the agent was only trying to sell it. But if it was, basically it was now going to be available for rental as well. So when they went to have a look at the property, of course, they didn't say anything. They then were told, again, a very good rental. They were told to pay the deposit and the first month's rental to secure it. The landlord sent them an ID with the banking details, false ID, of course. They paid it, they paid it into a bank account. So they would have thought that the banks would obviously have checked that in terms of FICA, that it was a genuine person who had that bank account. But it wasn't. It was all done on a scan, on false details. And of course, they came over to our office to say, well, it was your property that you were administering, who is the owner, and yeah.
And that was that.
That was that. We had no idea. And the bank, I won't mention the name of the bank, but a very big, well-known bank, not interested, actually. Really, that didn't help them at all. So what other
and that unfortunately happens.
Examples there, pretty much.
There are various... across the board, with it coming with rentals, so there's different kinds of rentals out there. One of them being holiday letting, which we don't actively do, but there's a lot of holiday letting. There's short-term lets. There's long-term lets. So you're looking at the very fast-moving area. That would be your lower rentals, apartments.
What's the scam?
The scam is the same. So for holiday letting, you're looking for accommodation somewhere. You pay for that accommodation, and when you get there, it's not there. Okay. Or you pay online for, same as we mentioned just now, very legit, too good to be true rental. The scammers are well versed, and then they go in and they catch people. The bottom line is, if anyone asks you to pay up front before even seeing a property, we've already got a warning bell. But people aren't aware. What we know as agents and real estate, we know these kind of things, whereas normal people out there are very trusting and naive, and they prey on those people, and that's the problem. And there's no policing around it, unfortunately.
Now, is it true that, would you say it's true that very often these are linked to accommodation in a couple of days' time? People who are desperate to move in shortly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's normally about 2 weeks before an occupation. And in the Cape, it's quite common for people to go to the very end, when they're at the end to find a property. They move in like a month before. We've had cases where we're doing a lease and processing a lease a day before they need to move in. So it's normally, there's quite an urgency at that point for that person to move in. So therefore, it's easier for the scammers to actually get them in and to scam.
What about the scam that you were talking to me about with the key deposits?
Oh, yes. So there's another one. This is for small-time scammers. It's any which way to make money out of people. You got, different levels of scamming. So there's also the scam whereby you call the landlord. The landlord says to you, no, sorry, they're out of town. They're not here at the moment. The house is available to view, but they must go to so-and-so at that address and collect the keys. They must go view the house and bring the keys back. Very odd, but anyway, they do it and people believe it. And when they get the keys, they've got to pay a deposit for the keys of about 1,500 or 800, whatever they've stipulated. And do you know how many people will go and have a look at that property, especially if it's for 5,000 Rand in Rondebosch? They'll think, okay, well, that's the arrangement, and they pay it because they know there's not one person looking, there's more like 30 people looking at the same property, and you lose out if you don't.
Now, it's easy for you to say that people shouldn't pay things up front, but I mean, the bottom line is, as far as I know, if you want to rent something, you are going to be asked to pay a deposit before you move into the property. I mean, sooner or later, before a person's going to give you access to their home, they're going to want some money from you. So when should you pay a deposit, and when would it be wrong, or you should be suspicious?
So when they start asking you already online, when you're having that initial conversation and they bring up to you the fact of money or paying money, you already have got a warning bell in the back of your mind. The bottom line for any person wanting to find a property is make sure the property actually exists. You know, don't be so desperate because you're going to lose out on a rental and your money. So rather go see that property. Whatever circumstance, go and look at that property and make sure that property you're looking at is actually the property being advertised. There are many ways for a tenant to find out if something is legit or not. You can go Google the address. You can go and Google the name of the so-called person. You can even buy a report. If you're not using an agent and you're dealing according to your landlord, you can go onto Property 24 and you can actually ask for a report, a CMA report, and it can give you who the registered owner is. You need to be very careful on those kind of things. So there's many ways to make sure that it's real. And the only time by law, you know, I don't care. We've got landlords out there. Everyone's got their own way of doing rentals. And regardless of how the landlord wants to rent, there's a process. You need to do an application. The application, when they say to you, we don't need to do a credit check, or we're not going to do any background check, you have a warning sign, because there's a proper landlord is not going to just take anybody off the street without doing credit vetting of some level.
Yeah.
So if they're just wanting you to go have a look with a friend that will pick up the key, pay a deposit, you don't have to put in an application. Without a shadow of a doubt, there's something wrong with that property because of the risk for a residential landlord. So just have your eyes and ears open. That's all I'm saying. So the time when you pay a deposit is when a lease has been signed, a thorough lease agreement that has been signed. There's been a vetting process. You have viewed the property. And, you know, if I'm a landlord, and I'm sure most landlords would agree, if I'm renting my home to somebody, the landlord's going to want to meet you. If they're not working through an agent, what landlord is going to, unless they're not in the country, they're going to have a family member, they want to maybe even Skype you, have an online meeting. They want to know who's going on. When the landlord doesn't want to meet you and doesn't care and put in you, and something's wrong. There's something doesn't sit right. And if it doesn't sit right, it's not right. Go with your gut. That's the bottom line.
Now, I think one of the obvious things is, of course, if you, and I'm not really trying to give our industry a plug, but I mean, if you are dealing through a reputable agency, you are unlikely to fall victim to a scam, because most scams are going to be carried out really by private individuals, but they might pretend that they are operating through an agency that of no consequence.
And they do.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
they do.
So how do you ascertain whether you're dealing with a real agent?
Well, you go and Google, you know, if you're an agent, and you need to find out who they're working for. And it's very easy nowadays. Everything is online. So if they say they're working for Piet Pompies Real Estate, you go and Google that. Go and see if that's legitimate. I mean, if you look at any of our agents at Chaz, you can find their name and you can see where they work, and you can phone the office and make sure that they actually work there and who they are and if they're a registered company. That's easy news to find at the moment.
I think a good tip that I saw, you know, when we were doing a little bit of research for this is when you're given phone numbers that are supposedly the phone numbers for that company or for that person, etc., don't just rely on the numbers that you are given. Look up the numbers yourself and then try to get hold of that person on that number. And even if the name is the same, in other words, they might say, I'd like to speak to Taryn Retief. Get hold of the Taryn Retief and then say, right, I'm the person you spoke to earlier on, and
that's it.
You might find that Taryn Retief says to you, hey, I never had a conversation with you early on.
And that's 100% because they do copy names.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll go to any length. So those kind of things are very important. Exactly what you just said now. Phone, make sure they're registered, make sure they're on some website. Otherwise, there's something wrong.
Okay. Is anything else you wanted to comment on there, or can I go to some questions? I see there's a few questions that have come in.
Well, we could carry on all night, I think, with rental scams. So I think
are there any other types of scams? I think that's the real value. So there's the key deposit scam, which is for a little bit of money.
Yes.
I mean, that's like you're going to get 1,000 rand or something.
Yes.
But there's the one that I spoke about where the person paid first month's rent and deposit. And, they were actually, they were an intelligent, younger, professional couple. And they weren't idiots. I mean, so, this idea that people that fall victims to scam artists are all a bit responsible for, their stupidity. It's when you're really keen and you're desperate to move into something, you might be a little bit less cautious than you should be.
And you're dealing with professionals. They do this for a living. So they're going to come across very professional. You get some that
so they try and pressurize you, if you're going to miss out, you're going to miss out. Taryn, I'm going to go to questions that have come in here. I've got two questions. I think Grant Fernhill, I don't know where you're from, Grant. You're really asking the same. I think we have sort of covered it. Under what circumstances should I go ahead and pay the deposit? Just elaborate a little bit. I think we have covered that a bit, but
yes. So basically, the only time, and I'm going to work on our example. The only time, and usually the only time you pay a deposit is once you've had the credit. Once that you've done your application, they've done a credit check on you. They've come back to you with your results, and they've said yes, we'd like you to take the opportunity to draw up a lease, and you've signed the lease agreement. The landlord signed the lease agreement. Everybody signed. You've got a legitimate lease. They will then request from you the deposit, and usually that is the time they normally ask for a deposit or a double deposit and the first month's rental. But you need to have all your documents in place and that you've actually seen the property, you've met the owner. Most important.
Okay. Pauline Kutstoff, sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Application fee. Is it normal to pay this together with the deposit? Is that kosher? The application fee. I wonder if you're talking about a
lease fee.
Would that be a lease fee?
Administrative. Yeah, so
a lease fee together with deposit.
Yeah. So I don't know if you. Let me just explain. So there should be three fees. There would be when you do your application, there will be a TPN credit check or a credit check fee that you need to pay in order for that agent or the landlord to do credit checks on you. That's standard. And then the second part would be when they've accepted your lease, they will normally charge you a lease administration fee. And that is basically an administration fee for all the paperwork, the lease agreements, the loading of the systems, et cetera, et cetera. And that is asked for, so they'll ask you for a month's deposit or double month's deposit, your first month's rental, and a lease administration fee.
But Taryn, I think you're talking obviously about an agency that's doing a rental.
Yes.
Now, in terms of a scam, why would
exactly? So
if a private lease is being organized or offered, would a person be doing an application fee or a lease fee? And for that matter, not that that's in the question, but what about credit checking fees? Is that something people pay for?
Normally, because it costs what anyone can really go on, and a landlord can go and find a facility that do offer that for landlords to do credit checks. It's going to cost him money to do the credit check. However, you've got a very good point there. If you are doing it directly with a landlord, there shouldn't be a need for a lease fee. because only the agencies, when an agency is doing it, then there's a lease fee because he's getting the deposit and the first month's rental anyway. So that wouldn't be normal with a landlord to a tenant, a private deal. I hope that.
Okay. All right, that's it. So that's the only questions that were there, Taryn. So we are, I think, on time for a 30-minute chat. And if we're a little bit shorter, well and good. Is there any other comments that you want to make in closing?
Yes. If you're in doubt, there are agencies. I'm not trying to say anything, but if you're in doubt, give us a call. We're quite happy to assist you in answering questions. Free service. We don't expect something out of that. Or if you're in doubt, question your doubt and search and make sure that before you give anybody money, that you have actually checked that that landlord is legitimate and the house is actually there. Be very, very cautious on letting go of money, because once it's gone, it's gone. So that would be my advice to all tenants out there, especially at this time, because it's happening and it's very real.
Right. Good advice. Taryn, thanks very much. And we look forward to the next Rental Thursday next month.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Have a good evening, everybody. Thanks, Andre.
Right. Cheers. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye now.
And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Ciao.